Here we are. So I want to begin this morning with a prayer from one of my favorite theologians who also writes beautiful prayers. It's Walter Brueggemann, and I'm sure many of you have heard of him and maybe sat at his feet. And so this is from Awed to Heaven, Rooted in Earth. And may we be so today. Let us pray. You are the God who creates and recreates, who judges and delivers, who calls by name and makes new. This much we gladly confess in praise and thanksgiving. This much we trust and affirm, only to ponder the chance that we are too glib, that we say more than we mean, that we say more than we can in fact risk. We make our gingerly confession in a world filled with those who cynically acknowledge none but themselves, and we are their fellow travelers. With those who in their vulnerability have no chance but prayer to you, and we stand in solidarity with them. Thus we ask, beyond our critical reservations, that you be your powerful, active, sovereign self. Give us eyes to see your wonders around us. Give us hearts to live into your risky miracles. Give us tongues to praise you beyond our doubt. For it is to you, only you, that we turn on behalf of the world that waits in its deathliness for your act of life. Amen. Oh, we are gathered here together as people, some of whom know each other well. Many of us don't know each other at all, but we claim that same sovereign God. And that's also why we read and why we share this love for literature that is part of our faith and part of the way we live that faith out in the world. I want to share with you a little bit about Chaim Potok. I can't see all of you. I see more names on the screen than I see faces. But I do want to know how many of you are familiar with Chaim Potok? Okay, well, Chaim Potok is someone who came to me in my coming of age time. He's not that much older than I am. He died when he was 73. He was a man who lived in the 50s and 60s and was writing and painting and active as a rabbi during most of those decades. He was born Herman Harold Potok and went by his Jewish name, Chaim. And he was known mostly for his books about Hasidic Judaism. And I read my first Chaim Potok book, which was his first novel, and it was called The Promise. And he is, this was one of his later novels. My name is Asher Lev. And when I read it, it really made a connection for me between creativity and faith and how we express ourselves creatively being an important part of our faith. Now, I am no artist. I love to look at art, but I have never, ever been able to draw. And I blame that on my first grade teacher who made me change from my left hand, which I was used to using and actually drew with as a toddler. And she changed me over to my right hand. I think I'm the last kid in the continental United States who was ever changed over from their left hand to their right hand. but that I blame my first grade teacher on my inability to actually do any kind of manual art. But I sure do love to look at art. And so to read a novel about a child who grew up as an artist, he grew up with a gift for drawing, for painting. But he also grew up as a Laodite Jew. And that is a very, very conservative sect of Hasidic Judaism. And they are focused in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And that's where the setting of this story takes place for the most part. And that's where Asher is born to parents who for generations go back as this sect of Jew, and very conservative. And their life revolves around their synagogue and the Reb, who is very famous in their circles, and he has great power over his people. Asher is the only child of these two folks, and becomes a real focus for their lives. And the fact that he's drawing amuses his mother, but it is of grave concern to his father. He wants very deeply to draw, and that is his identity in life, along with his name, which is a Hasidic historical Jewish name, Asher Lev. He's named for his grandfather and his almost larger than life mythical great-great-grandfather, and who were Russian Jews. And he claims that heritage almost as a mantra throughout the book. My name is Asher Lev. He claims that, and even as he grows into his artist self, he never leaves that behind, even though being a visual artist is not smiled upon in this sect of Judaism and in any Hasidic Judaism. And in fact, it is frowned upon. I want to share with you just a little piece of what the relationship between Asher and his father was. I drew from my memory my father studying the Talmud. He said to me once, gazing at one of my drawings, "You have nothing better to do with your time, Asher? Your grandfather would not have liked you to waste so much time with foolishness." "It's a drawing, Papa." "I see what it is." "A drawing is not foolishness, Papa." He looked at me in surprise, but he said nothing. I was almost 5 at the time. So, while Asher's mother indulged his art, his father did not. I want to show a video clip. This was also a play that Asher Lev collaborated to write the play, that has been performed on Broadway, and I'm guessing at lots and lots of bar mitzvahs. It's a stunning monologue, and I think, and it sets up the whole book, because it's the beginning of the book. So there's no spoiler alert. If you have not yet read My Name is Asher Lev, this will only be an enlightenment of how the story kind of ends. And it begins with Asher's sort of reflection on his life as an artist. So let's see if Owen can connect with that monologue.
Asher Lev.
Wait a minute, let me find it. No, that's not the one.
Just reread it.
Which one? Where? Here it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
My name is Ashalev, the Ashalev, the legendary, notorious Lev, painter of the Brooklyn crucifixions. I'm an observant Jew, a Hasid, what some call a Torah Jew. And of course, observant Jews don't paint crucifixions. In fact, observant Jews don't paint at all in the way that I'm painting. So strong words have been written and spoken about me, myths generated. I'm a self-hater, a traitor, a blasphemer, a bringer of shame upon my friends, my family, and my people, and of course myself. But I'm none of those things. And of course, in some ways, I'm all of those things. But I'll not apologize. I will not apologize for a mystery. And that is what it's been all along. A mystery of the sort that theologians think about when they use words like wonder and awe. Nowhere in my family background was there any indication that I would come into the world with a unique and disquieting gift.
Unmute, LeeAnn. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Asher's childhood discovery of his gift.
Sorry.
Okay. Is the way he actively notices the world with all of his descriptions of intimate family moments and the people on the street or the subway. All of his descriptions are so visceral and descriptive beyond words. They invite me, as someone who is an oral learner, not a visual learner, they invite me to paint pictures in my own mind. And he draws often unconsciously as a child. He is drawing in his mind all the time and describing that with his words as the narrator of this novel. The world begins for him and imagines him as he draws. He draws on the wall beside his bed, and it horrifies his parents. He draws his dreams, where his mythic Russian ancestor comes to haunt him. When he starts school, he draws in the margins of every textbook. He brings horror to the rabbis who teach him because he draws in the margins of the holy books. His mother is the only one who encourages him. And she says to him, "Oh, Asher, draw pretty things. Draw birds and flowers." But what Asher feels drawn to draw more than almost anything else is the pain that he sees around him. The pain that he sees in his mother's eyes when his father leaves on his frequent travels for the Reb. He is traveling for the cause of oppressed Jews, especially those in Russia, trying to resettle them in the United States. His mother's brother, his uncle Yaakov, also travels for the Reb. And his close relationship with his mother changes dramatically when there's a phone call that brought the tragic news that her brother, Yaakov, had been killed in an automobile accident while he was traveling for the Rev. His mother was totally despondent, had a breakdown, and wound up hospitalized. The grief continued to haunt her, and Asher was crushed that he was unable to make her happy with his pictures anymore. It didn't seem like he couldn't draw enough birds or flowers to make his mother well. He wanted desperately for his pictures to make his mother well. The grief continued to haunt her, and he pictured her in his mind standing by the window, watching his father go away again on one of his trips. And then when it was snowing and it looked like the airplane wasn't going to land, she was looking out the window again, wishing for him to come home, and actually talking to her brother Jacob and wishing he would also come home. He never will return, of course. And he knows that Asher knows that she fears the same thing about her own husband, his papa. His briefcase is always filled with important papers representing the lives of precious Jews who could be saved from the oppression they faced in Russia and Europe. It was dangerous work. It was risky work. And it made an impression on this little boy who had to draw his feelings to get them out. Owen, can you find that, record that video of the child's drawings? Okay. I'd like for us to think together a little bit about images, visual images from our childhoods that have remained important to us through the years. And I don't know if any of you have thought about that at all. I can share one with you that I identified with in the novel, and that is the image of the window. The window, you know, looking out the window, and I'm looking out my window right now, there was always something out there that I connected with, whether it was the grapefruit tree in our front yard or the peacocks roosting in our little tree house in the backyard. There were those things from my childhood that continue to have meaning for me today. And the window was a really, really significant image for Asher. So is there, the reason I remember the grapefruit is because that was the major way that we made money during hurricane season, was picking up fruit that fell off of the trees in the neighborhood and throwing them over the fence into the grove in the backyard. And peacocks continue to be an image of beauty for me. And there are peacock feathers that I've picked up off the ground in a vase in my house. And there's a little pillow with a peacock feather fan on it. It just is a memory of my childhood home that is very special to me, and brings me joy. And looking out the window right now, I see the railroad tracks. You may hear the Amtrak train coming through sometime before we close today. It's an image that brings me both joy and some sorrow, because my mother's family, in my mother's family, almost everyone except my mother worked for the railroad. My grandfather was an engineer on the Orange Blossom Special, the steam engine that started in Miami and went up the East Coast. So every time that train goes by, it makes me think of my grandfather. And that's a very happy thought, and also a sad one, because, you know, we miss those people who were so special in our lives. But the train reminds me of both the joy and the empty part of missing someone who has been close to you and is now gone. Does anyone else have a visual image from childhood that has kind of served you through your life in a way that helps you be faithful, or helps you express your emotions, or just find some solace?
Okay, this is Dee Beggarly, and I'll jump in.
Yeah,
Good morning. I'm reminded my father was a Methodist minister as well. And in his study, wherever it was, he had two of Salvador Dali's paintings, St. John of the Cross and the Last Supper. So as a little girl, I, would go in his study and everything, and I would see those framed paintings up on the wall. And I just thought they were, just so beautiful and so inspirational. Well, you can imagine when I grew up and I saw other of Salvador Dali's work, my goodness, I think I got the wrong guy or something, But we went to Atlanta for one of his exhibits, and in the course of the exhibit, they said he was the most significant religious painter in the last 500 years. So I said, well, we weren't too far off, I guess. So and I have those when my dad died. I have those two same pieces and right by my computer in my office. And so I look up, and it's the same kind of thing. It's with my dad. It's with the images of Christ and everything. And it's very special for me.
thank you, Dee. Anyone else?
My father was a naval aviator, And he flew planes off and on to aircraft carriers. He flew into the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so when I see FA-18s and jets flying over, I'm reminded of him. And it's a mixed bag of emotions, but it's certainly a visual image that takes me back to a deep place in my heart.
Thanks, Oeen. Anybody else? Well, I said that the window had a special meaning for Asher, and it was because he lived in a small apartment. I guess that goes without saying. There aren't too many big apartments in Crown Heights, with his two parents. And the window looked out onto Brooklyn Parkway. And so he saw a lot of life going by that window. And he watched as his parents stood at the window. His father often prayed there, and would be in his sort of prayerful awe state and rocking as he prayed. And Asher drew him there many times. And he watched his mother watching at the window for her brother to come back, for her father to come back from his journeys, and for his father to come back from his journeys. And he was also aware that his mother watched for him as he came home. And when he came home late, it was a big deal. And he knew that he would see his mother waiting at the window, watching for him and waiting to ream him out about being late. So that window became a very important image in Asher's art as a child and much later as an adult. Asher's need to paint the pain of the world led him to museums, and there were lots of museums in Brooklyn and also in Manhattan. And his mother started taking him to the museums and was disturbed at the paintings that Asher would stand in front of, and kept urging him to the pretty pictures that made the world a beautiful place. But he was drawn to pictures that depicted pain because he saw so much of it in his own home, in his own sect of Judaism, with the people his father served, the refugees from Russia. And that was something that he felt the need to express in his art. The images of his mother's pain especially obsessed him as he painted them in his mind over and over. And the descriptions of him painting in his mind were fascinating to me because they're so kind of foreign to my way of thinking and looking at the world and experiencing the world. And it was a real helpful stretch for me when I first read the book, and a helpful stretch for me as I reread it this past week to prepare for our conversation together. The thing that he really focused on, and this was after the Reb had noticed Asher's gift and decided that it should be developed. And this was a big deal because art was not something that was valued in Hasidic Judaism. And in fact, it was looked upon with some great deal of skepticism that it was probably that it could be something from the other side. And so when the Reb decided to find another sort of errant Jew to mentor young Asher, he introduced him to Jacob Kahn, who was a known in the novel, a very well-known painter and sculptor. And he was active in artistic circles, both in the United States and in Europe. And so Jacob took Asher under his wing and brought him to his studio. And Asher painted there. He had unlimited access to paints and pencils and charcoal and all kind, and he learned how to stretch canvases. And Asher, who always painted in his full Hasidic garb with his yarmulke on and his prayer tassels hanging down, he found that Jacob Kahn stripped to the waist whenever he painted or sculpted. And so Asher stripped to the waist, but he left his prayer tassels on, and they always were dragging in the paint. But he spent every Sunday afternoon with Jacob Kahn, and then began to spend summers with Jacob and his wife at the seashore. And so he really had a mentor. As he grew further and further away from his father, he drew closer to Jacob Kahn and began to be able to hear the critique that Jacob brought to Asher's work and the awe that Jacob found in Asher's gift, which was being developed now. Jacob took him to the big museums in Manhattan and made him look at the nudes. One very surprising afternoon, Asher showed up at Jacob's studio, and there was a young woman about to disrobe so that Asher could draw his first nudes. It was a big critical time when Jacob basically said, "You don't do this, and you're no artist. You know, you got to do this. This is part of the gig." And then he noticed Asher noticing in the museums the crucifixions and all the different paintings of the crucifixions. And he looked at those with, Asher looked at them with a great deal of shame that he even wanted to look at it. Because while his parents had explained very carefully to him that it was not the Jews who killed Jesus, but the Romans who killed Jesus, that the cross was a Roman instrument of torture and death, not a Jewish one, he still knew that it was wrong for him to want so deeply, to need to draw a crucifix. And that was the real turning point in his art. He had already started selling, was making money as an artist. Jacob had introduced Asher to his patron, who plays a pretty important part in the story as well. She is the one from the other side who helps them translate their art into the art of the world that people will buy to make her rich and to make them rich. And that whole dilemma of what is art and how do you let go of it? And isn't it just for me, Asher said? Is it for my family? And it was Jacob Kahn who helped him to understand that it was for the world. That if your feelings are only private feelings, they're not going to help change the world in a way that will make a difference for more than just yourself. And so that was a real turning point for Asher and his art. The acclaimed Jewish author Chaim Potok was also an artist, and you can look up his paintings online and see what he did. I believe he was the one who drew the child's pictures in that little video that we watched a little earlier. Okay, Father's Day reflections on Asher Lev. We've already started doing a little bit of that. His relationship with his father, which was fraught and remained fraught until the very end of the book. There is a sequel, by the way, The Gift of Asher Lev, that looks at Asher as a middle-aged artist who is still an observant Hasidic Jew. But it's also about the relationship with his mentor, Jacob Kahn. In 1966, he came out with a novel, which I have not yet read, that would have been good for today, called The Gates of November, which depicts the life of a Jewish father and son spanning across Soviet history. So that's my next Chaim Potok read. But anyway, Father's Day reflections on our own relationships with our own fathers or father figures or significant mentors in our lives, or if you've read the novel, any thoughts you might have about the relationship between Asher and his dad, or Asher and his mentor, Jacob Kahn. I'm throwing it out there.
Well, I read about half of it. I'll finish it this week. The other book I've read of his is The Chosen in high school. And that was a really good book. I guess one thing that just kept, from what I've read so far, and I guess because it was so opposite of how I was as a child, I tended to follow the rules, just kind of, and I kept wanting to just say, oh, come on, Asher, just do your studies and do your art. Don't be just so resistant. So that was, but as I was doing that, I was like, because that's not what you did, Catherine. You followed the path of, it was a good path, but if I had done something like that, just so, that would not have been acceptable from my father, that's for sure.
Well, and it wasn't acceptable to Asher's.
Oh yeah.
I am the mother of two sons who are artists. They're both very smart young men who were good students up to a point, and then they started following their art. And so what you just said, I could identify with both you and your mother or your father, because they have gone on and done amazing things with their art, but it wasn't because I was encouraging them all along the way. I wanted them to do both. And at some point, that wasn't enough for them to do both. It was the path that they had to take to become the young men that they are. And Owen has been with me on some of that journey as a mother and as a teacher. That's part of what I got out of this, reading it at this stage in my life that I didn't get reading it when I was 18. Mm-hmm. But it's, I really appreciate that observation about yourself. Anybody else? Okay, it looks like our time. It looks like our time is getting close to done. I wanted to close with an expression of thanksgiving for all of those kinds of relationships. Our relationship with art, our relationships with our families and our faith, and how those all kind of get mingled together in the way that we live our lives and express ourselves, and how our own creative spirits are enabled. May you all have a peaceful Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, LeeAnn, so much. This was just beautiful. Just beautiful. And thank you all for being with us today. Please join us next Sunday. We have kind of a special event. It will start at 8:30 rather than 9, and it will probably be Zoomed nationally, because we have Chester Johnson, who is a writer and an essayist and a poet, who will be having conversation with Dr. Catherine Meeks, who is the executive director of the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing. And they will be talking about Chester's book, Damaged Heritage, in which he confesses and asks for forgiveness for the responsibility that his grandfather took in the Elaine Race Massacre in Elaine, Arkansas in 1919. So join us if you can. They are anxious for conversation, for questions. And if you want to visit the book, Damaged Heritage, it's online available, but mainly it's available through the Cathedral Bookstore, where our beloved Catherine can drop ship it to you ASAP. Thank you. Happy Father's Day to all of you who are fathers, and to those of you who father in different ways. Be well. God's peace.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.